We'll do it this way. Shabbat Shalom. If anyone who's coming in will come in, and not coming in will not come in. It's very. You had a nice lunch. Now I'll help you fall asleep after lunch. Bye. No. Great. So let's get started. So like any reasonable Jew, I will start my story with a story. We are a people of stories, and we need good stories. So I will tell you a story that I think about a lot. A few years ago, I'm sitting at the JCC, and for those of you who didn't quite follow or aren't that up on geography, the JCC in Krakow is the city closest to Auschwitz. So when we talk about, even if you didn't care about Krakow, never heard of Krakow, no idea about Krakow, and you wanted to visit Auschwitz, you would stay over in Krakow. So we are the Jewish community next to Auschwitz. So a few years ago, sitting in my office, young woman in her early 20s walks in asking to speak to a rabbi. My father would have been very happy had I been that rabbi, but unfortunately for him, but probably fortunately for everyone else, I did not become a rabbi, but I was the closest thing probably in the building at that time. So they brought this young woman who was looking very, very nervous, brought her up to my office. She sits down. I say, "How can I help you?" She says, "Well, I don't know, if I'm in the right place, what I'm doing." I said, "No, it's fine. Just tell me what's going on." She tells me that her grandmother, who was at that time in her mid to late 80s, I forget exactly, called her up and said, "Come right over." She says, "Grandma, you're okay? Everything fine?" Yes, I'm fine. Come right over." So she goes over to her grandmother's house. Her grandmother sits her down at the edge of the bed and says, "I have to tell you a story." Now, this girl, whose name was Maria, grew up, like just about everybody else in Poland, Catholic. She had no clue that there was anything else going on. Poland is just about the most Catholic place on earth these days. Almost everyone's Catholic. So she sits down. Her grandmother goes, "Listen, I have to tell you something I've never told anyone." And she begins to tell her a story. The grandmother tells her that grandmother was a little girl during the war in the ghetto. And one day her parents sat her down and they took her to the edge of the ghetto. By the way, this is complete news to her granddaughter. Never heard anything about it. Sat her down at the edge of the ghetto, and they told her two things. They said, "Be a good girl and never tell anyone you're Jewish." They passed her over to somebody who smuggled her out of the ghetto, to a family that raised her. She always knew who she was. She got married, had a career, children, grandchildren, and never told a soul, as her parents instructed her. Never told anyone, her husband, nobody, that she was actually Jewish. Until she sits her eldest granddaughter down and tells her this story. And at the end, and Maria is sitting there in shock, at the end she goes, "I was a good girl, I kept my promise, I could never find out what it meant to be Jewish. You go find out." So Maria literally takes her phone and Googles Jewish in Krakow, which is where she was sitting, and sees there's a JCC, and 2 days later is sitting in my office. Now, this is what I do. I work there. I'm there for a long time. People finding out they're Jewish. But I don't hear stories like that every day. I've heard a few, but that's a pretty dramatic one. So she's looking at me, waiting for what am I going to say? And I was like, "Oh, is that it? That's the whole story?" I was, "Oh, I heard like 6 of those yesterday. Come on." She goes, "What should I do?" I said, "Well, first of all, you're in the right place. There are so many others like you." And she calmed down a little bit. What do? She goes, I said, come to Shabbat dinner. We do a Shabbat dinner at the JCC every week. This week, I wasn't there because I'm here. We had 200 for Shabbat dinner. And we do Shabbat dinner every week. So, of course, when I tell her to come for Shabbat dinner, what does she say? What's Shabbat dinner? Exactly. Thank you. How does she know? She doesn't know what Shabbat dinner is. So anyway, once I explain what Shabbat dinner is, she comes to Shabbat dinner. She meets some other people. She gets involved. She goes on birthright. She goes to Israel, and she becomes an active member of the Jewish community. And now what's remarkable about this story, the drama of the grandmother who finally, after 80 years, tells someone she's Jewish, that's the drama. But I think what's really interesting about that story is just, this is what's happening. The amazing thing about the story is really how not amazing that is today in Poland. People are finding out every day, Poles are finding out every day that they're Jewish and choosing to get involved, right? You could also find that story and Maria could do nothing with it. You don't have to go and seek that out, especially in a world of anti-Semitism, increased anti-Semitism, a post-Holocaust society, post-communist. You know, it takes a lot to get somebody to do that, and that's really what we're seeing today. My wife has a similar story. My wife grew up also without knowing she was Jewish, found out she was Jewish, came to a Hanukkah party at the JCC where she met a fast-talking New Yorker, became very interested in her Jewish identity, and we got married. We had the chuppah in the courtyard in front of the JCC, and we have a 3-year-old daughter that goes to our preschool, which is the first Jewish preschool in Krakow to open since the Holocaust. So lots of good things going on, but maybe a little bit of history. How do we get to this point? Because it's not, I don't think, self-evident how people in Poland in 2020s, 2025, are finding out that they're actually Jewish. I don't think for most of us this is part of our daily experience. I think for Americans, if you talk about a story like this, we all know the Madeleine Albright story, right? Everyone remembers Madeleine Albright famously found out that she was Jewish, and this. But in Poland, it's like everybody's Madeleine Albright in that sense. So Poland, if I tell you, and I don't have to tell you, I think, because many of you already have come up to me and tell me how you have Polish roots. Poland was a very Jewish place for a very long time. Poland has 1,000 years of Jewish history. And what's amazing to me, a couple statistics. One, 3/4 of American Jews have Polish roots. How many of you have Polish roots? That's like more. But really, a couple statistics jump out at me besides that. One, 300 years ago, 75% of the Jews in the world were in Poland, right? So it's almost like Israel and half of America was what Poland was to the Jewish people. 3 out of every 4 Jews on the planet. And that community was ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. By 1939, when the war started and the Holocaust began, or what led to the Holocaust began, Poland was 10% Jewish. The United States today, 1.5%, 2%, right? 3.5 million Jews living in Poland. Cities like Warsaw were 1/3 Jewish. Krakow, where I live, 1/4 Jewish. Cities in the east, Białystok, Lublin, something like 60, 70% Jewish. There are no cities on earth today outside of Israel as Jewish as these cities in Poland were before the war. September 1st, Germany invades from one side. September 17th, if you know your World War II history, you'll remember the Soviet Union invades from the other side. Poland is divided. The Germans and their accomplices across Europe perpetrate the Holocaust. 6 million European Jews are murdered, more than half of whom are Polish Jews, right? More than half the victims of the Holocaust, Polish Jews. 90% of Polish Jews are murdered. 9 out of every 10 Jews living in Poland murdered in the Holocaust. And for us, the general narrative that we know, that we grew up in, that I grew up in New York hearing, Jews lived in Poland, Jews were murdered in Poland, there were a few lucky survivors who left Poland. That's the end of Jewish life in Poland. And this is our general world view. But not all the Jews left. And although it was a small percentage of Jews that stayed, it was a small percentage of a big number to start with. So you had Jews that stayed in Poland after the war. And what happened what was life like in Poland during the war, after the war? Not great. Not great for anybody, certainly not great for the Jews. You had the Soviet Union running things. Soviet Union also somewhat hostile to the Jews over the years. And the Jews who remained in Poland had to do something that our people has had to do far too many times in our history. What did the Jews in Poland, the remaining Jews in Poland, survived the Holocaust? Their families been there for generations, stayed in Poland for all different reasons. What did they do? They went into hiding, exactly. They went underground, they hid their names, and they didn't tell their own families, like this situation here. Didn't tell their own families, like my wife's family. You wanted to protect your children in an anti-Semitic environment. The way you protect your family is by not telling them that you're Jewish. So by the end of the 80s, by 1989, when communism is ending, there's almost no Jewish life in Poland. But it's not really true there's no Jewish life. It would almost be like going to Spain at the beginning of the 16th century. Like, what's the official number of Jews in Spain in the beginning of the 16th century? 0, right? But of course, you walk down the street, Jewish, right? So this was a little bit what was happening in Poland. And since 1989, two very interesting things are happening. And one is dependent on the other. And one is particularly surprising. Maybe they're both particularly surprising, actually. The second one, I already mentioned, people finding out they're Jewish and getting involved. But you need a certain situation to exist for that to happen. And what does that mean? It means that there has been a tremendous amount of interest in everything Jewish among non-Jews in Poland, which is surprising, I think, on two levels. First of all, we Jews are generally skeptical when non-Jews pay a lot of attention to us. Rightfully so. Not rightfully so. Rightfully so that there's, to understand why there's skepticism, not to be all negative, but throughout our history, it's very often eventually not turned out well when non-Jews pay a lot of attention to us. Right? Jews have done well. When are we, okay, we left alone, left to thrive, pay our taxes. Sometimes we pay extra taxes in history. Okay. Right? But anytime there's a lot of attention, even if it's positive attention, usually eventually at some point it went south. So we're skeptical. We don't embrace it. Wow, all these non-Jews are interested in us. Yay. We're very skeptical. But this isn't just anywhere. Right? This is Poland. This is a place that many of us grow up hearing, myself included. Worse than Germany, the worst place on earth. Poles are the worst. There's a famous quote by the former Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Shamir. He said that Poles get their anti-Semitism with their mother's milk. This is a heavy thing to say. So the idea, that I'm telling you, after living in Poland for 24 years, that there's this tremendous interest starting in 1989 of everything Jewish in non-Jews is I think, a lot to get your head around. Poles in 1989, I think Poland was so Jewish for such a long time, and there was no closure after the Holocaust. You have 10% of the population Jewish in 1939. It's similar to the African American population in the United States today, just for us to get our heads around what we're talking about in terms of how large a minority. 10% is a big minority in the country. And 1939, there's 3.5 million Jews. By 1945, most of them are murdered. The remaining ones pushed out, driven underground. And nobody speaks about it that much for 45 years because the Soviet Union didn't want it spoken about. Anti-Semitism is not something you focus on when you yourself are anti-Semitic as a country, running Poland. So in 1989, there was an interest in these people that lived with their neighbors for 1,000 years. And they can't continue this dialogue that had been going on, sometimes good, sometimes bad. I don't mean to say 1,000 years in Poland, it was all fun and games for the Jews, no. But there's a reason there were so many Jews living in Poland when they were kicked out of other places in Europe. Poland welcomed them, right? So non-Jews start to learn Jewish history and they start to get involved. Jewish music becomes popular. They start to open Jewish studies departments at universities. They open Jewish museums that we were just talking about, a Jewish museum that you visited in 2006 in Krakow. They start Jewish culture festivals. Does anybody know where what's considered the largest Jewish culture festival outside of Israel in the world is? It's kind of obvious because I'm saying from Krakow, fair enough. But if somebody would say, to me, if somebody just gives you a guess a month ago, or you have no idea, about the context of Poland, they give you 1,000 guesses. Who would think Krakow? Started by two non-Jews 35 years ago, one of whom is still running it today in its 35th, 36th year. So there's this curiosity of non-Jews being fascinated by everything Jewish in Poland, of all places, might just be a curiosity. In other words, who cares, right? A place that used to be very Jewish has a law that, now they all are fascinated by us. Where were they during all of this might be the case. But it has relevance and meaning for the Jewish people today. Why? Because this environment created by non-Jewish interest in everything Jewish has created this environment that's conducive to Jewish life because of the interest. So these people, like my wife, like Maria that I mentioned, like the hundreds, even thousands of Poles who are finding out they have a Jewish parent or a Jewish grandparent, the reason this non-Jewish interest becomes relevant to us is because it's created an environment that allows these people to step forward and be counted. Right? Because they see all the non-Jewish interest in everything Jewish, they say, wow, I'm going to actually walk into a JCC, a synagogue, and go explore my identity. Considering what the world looks like today, and considering Polish history, it takes a lot to have somebody say, my whole family was murdered in the Holocaust. I see anti-Semitism rampant in many places around the world. I'm going to go step forward to be Jewish. Yay. I mean, it's not what you would expect. If you Google how many Jews are in Krakow, it says there are 100 Jews in Krakow. We have 1,150 Jewish members at our JCC in a community with 100 Jews. This tells us two things. One, it tells us that we're doing a pretty good job of attracting the community. But really what it tells us is that the numbers are nonsense. Nobody has any idea how many Jews there are. There was like the famous quote, you have the known known, the known unknown, right? This is the known unknown. We understand that we don't understand how many Jews there are, but you cannot start in 1939 with 3.5 million Jews. There's no way to go from 1939, 3.5 million, considering more or less we know how many were killed, how many emigrated, natural causes that died, all this. You can't get to the numbers that are the official numbers today in Poland, 10, 15,000. It's impossible. Without question, in my opinion, for what that's worth, you have at least 100,000 Poles today that have a Jewish grandparent. Now, how many of them know? How many of them will ever know? How many will find out and get interested? How many will get interested and do something about it? These are all, to some degree, up to us. But there's certainly a lot to work with. And nobody, when we opened the JCC, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, when we opened the JCC 17 years ago, in a million years, nobody would think we would have 1,150 members in our center. Our center was opened by King Charles, who had visited, wanted to do something to help the Jews, was going to originally do something to a senior citizen center, and that idea grew into a JCC. He and the Queen of England, Camilla, came in 2008 and opened the JCC. He maintained an active interest. I stayed in touch. I would visit him in London and brief him about our work. And he came back in January as the king, which was really cool. He came back as the king of England to the JCC, which we never thought would happen. He was the prince was one thing, but to come back as the king is like a big thing. So we opened in 2008 by then Prince of England, Prince of Wales, now King of England. And we've been open 17 years. Our JCC looks exactly like your lovely Mirage JCC if you took some kind of laser beam that could shrink things and shrink your JCC by 98%, you would have our JCC. And I was joking when I went to the JCC and spoke there, and Scott, you have a wonderful CEO who's become a friend of mine, and I was looking at the newly named pickleball courts and realized that my whole JCC would fit on your pickleball courts. So our JCC is a little bit different in size, but mighty in terms of what we do. I mentioned I mentioned the preschool, so it's the first Jewish preschool to open since the Holocaust. BBYO, run through our JCC. We have more than 200 to about 250 in our Hillel, run through our JCC. I mentioned Shabbat dinner that we do every week, 1,150 members. We have 56 Holocaust survivors that we're caring for. Again, there's no federation in Poland. There's no Jewish Family Services in Poland. We are the ones doing all the heavy lifting. So it's as if you keep one Jewish building open in town, close every other Jewish building, God forbid. That's essentially what our JCC is. We have hundreds of people studying Hebrew, and the rabbi has classes, and the other rabbi has classes there. Almost everything going on in a growing Jewish community is happening throughout at our JCC. And beyond that, we have more than 100,000 visitors a year who come through our building to see life in a place that is very unexpected. Now, why does all this matter? Again, it's tiny. What we're talking about, 1,150 members in a city that used to have 65,000 Jews. Why does it matter? Well, these people finding out they're Jewish, these lost Jews, are something we've been thinking about a lot for the last couple of years. And Rabbi mentioned that, how is it that we're not saying the prayer, for the hostages? And I personally, in our building, we had all the hostage posters on our fence. We had a 25-foot wide Bring Them Home Now banner that we just took down. We do not leave our lost brothers and sisters behind. And these young people, these people finding out they're Jewish, these are secondary victims of the Holocaust. These are not, they weren't in the camps and they weren't in hiding, but they were disconnected from their identity because of the Holocaust. And that 6 million number does not tell the whole story, because 6 million are the Jews murdered in the Holocaust, and we can't go back and save even one of them. What would we do right now as a community? There's someone we could go back and save from the Holocaust. We would do anything to save one family, one child from the Holocaust, but we can't. But this other category, not people who were murdered, but people who lost their Jewish identity, we can actually go and find these lost Jewish souls and bring them back into the community. And how do we not do everything we can? What a gift to be given, that we can actually affect the number of Jews lost to the Jewish world because of the Holocaust. Beyond that, who are these people? These are either the descendants of Holocaust survivors or the descendants of Holocaust victims. If the victims are looking down and watching us, what greater thing can we do? We can light candles, we can say prayers, we can build museums. These are important things to do. But if they're watching us, what greater thing can we do than to go out and find their lost descendants and bring them back into the fold? What an opportunity to be able to do. Beyond that, in a world that sounds almost trite and silly to say, in a world of increased anti-Semitism, what does it say about us that Jewish life is thriving not only in Orange County and in Brooklyn and in Tel Aviv and Buenos Aires, that Jewish life is thriving in the community next to Auschwitz? I think it reminds not only anti-Semites who don't like us that we're not going anywhere, much more important, it reminds our own young people who grew up feeling, wait, why am I treated differently? Why does my school have so much extra security? What's wrong with us? Why are guards in front of synagogues but not in front of churches and mosques? It reminds them that we are a people of strength and a people of resilience. And if Jewish life can thrive organically with Jews and non-Jews working together within living memory of the Holocaust, it shows how strong and resilient we as a people are, and we need to focus on strength and our resilience. But it's not only about us. When the war started in Ukraine 3.5 years ago, February 24th, 2022, the war started in Ukraine. We decided that we're going to do everything we can to help Ukrainian refugees. We didn't know what that meant. We're a little community center. But we decided, we put a banner in front of our building saying in Ukrainian, welcome. I thought it was a nice gesture. Maybe there'll be some refugees. I thought the war would be over in a day or two. Please don't ask me for any prognostications about things like that. I was a little bit off. But I thought it would be nice that the Ukrainian refugees, however, a handful or more, would see that the Jewish community was welcoming them. Well, a lot of them came, and they took the sign very literally, and they started to come into our building and tell us what they needed. And this is the early days of the war. All women and children, men still between 18 and 65, not allowed out of the country. So you have vulnerable women and children who've escaped war, crossed the border, and they don't have diapers, or they don't have milk, or they don't have warm clothing, or they needed to get somewhere, or they couldn't get money. So we start helping these refugees, and a line starts to form in front of our building. The local population starts to see a line, and they start to bring clothing, they start to bring us food. We start to post what we're doing in social media. World starts to see what we're doing, starts to send us money. It starts to grow and grow and grow. Within 2 weeks, we doubled in size. We were 35 full-time employees. We went up to 75 full-time employees. And we became a full-scale humanitarian aid operation. So we'll start feeding people, and then the war continued. We thought we'll feed them for a few days. That's what we can do. But the war's not ending. These people that we're feeding, you're feeding a mother and 2 children, but she's going to go sleep in the cold on a bench. It's not all we can do. So we started to find housing. That meant apartments, Airbnbs, hotels. At one point, we were paying for the housing for 540 women and children a night. But the war continues. So what does that mean? They need to get into the workforce. But they can't get into the workforce. Why? Because they're with children. Daycare we opened. How can they get into the workforce? They don't speak Polish or English. Language classes. Then they need job training. They've gone through hell. What do they need? Psychological support. So literally, full-scale humanitarian aid operation began 3.5 years ago, and a lot of it continues. The food pantry that we opened on the second day of the war has never closed. When I say never closed, I mean Christmas, Yom Kippur, every Shabbat, New Year's Day. Every single day there's a line of Ukrainian women and children waiting to take food in our JCC. Even the rest of the building is closed. Yom Kippur, the one thing that's open, the food pantry doesn't close. To date, we have directly helped 420,000 Ukrainian refugees, 99% of whom are not Jewish. We continue to help about 1,200 refugees a week, 7 days a week. Why do we do this? 80 years ago, when the Jews were the primary victim in the Holocaust, the world did almost nothing. And I'm angry about that still. And 80 years later, we can look at suffering in the same place, and we can say, the world didn't help us, we don't owe anything to the world. Or we can say, no, the world didn't help us, therefore 6 million of our brothers and sisters were murdered, therefore we have a personal understanding and memory of what it means to be forsaken, and that gives us a special responsibility to try to prevent the suffering of others. And I will tell you what a privilege it is, considering what my community has gone through, to be able 80 years later for us, who's gone from really victims of genocide in Krakow, to be able to prevent the suffering of others and help those women and children is really something very special. And our community has not come full circle. You don't ever come full circle after the Holocaust, but we've come far enough in the circle that now we're able to provide support for others. So, thank you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Yes?
Tell us a bit of your own story, how you as a New Yorker found yourself making this your life.
Yeah, so I blew off law school, or I deferred law school for a year and met somebody who was on a kibbutz in Israel. That sounded good, so I went to Israel, fell in love with Israel, decided to not go back to law school. That's when all the lawyers in the crowd are always like, good job. Made Aliyah, was a lone soldier, and I was, after the army, living on a kibbutz in the desert, met a Polish woman, different Polish woman, fell in love, decided to move to Poland sight unseen in 2001, got a job in Krakow teaching at the university. We broke up, but I liked Krakow, and Prince Charles came to Krakow, and they had this idea to build a JCC, and I was literally the only one in the country who knew what a JCC stood for, so they gave me the job. is it? We've grown. Now it's the largest Jewish organization in Poland. We're about 70 full-time employees, another 40 or so part-time, and we have more than 200 volunteers, almost none of whom are Jewish. So if you come for a Shabbat dinner, people who are taking your plate and bringing all of those people are young Polish non-Jews who help us. Yeah, in the back.
When you say they decided to build a JCC, Prince Charles had the idea? Or
Prince Charles had met with survivors, and they told him they didn't have a place to be together. So he said he'd help them. He went back to an organization in London called World Jewish Relief, and they did some research, and they said, instead of doing something only for the survivors, let's do something bigger to try to maybe revitalize this community. Prince Charles said okay and gave some of his personal funds, and with that World Jewish Relief, this organization, was able to raise the money in London and build our JCC and open it in the presence of my friend, King Charles. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the relationship of the Jewish community and the government of Poland and the local governments, over the last 20 years?
Yeah, it depends which government, of course. The government has changed. Generally, though, whichever government has been in power and whatever we ourselves think of different policies of the government, they've generally been pretty good to the Jews. Where you have issues in Poland are generally things that have little to do with today and a lot to do with Holocaust memory, right? So Poles have a hard time acknowledging, as they see themselves as victims, they often have a hard time acknowledging that they at times victimized others, meaning us. So that's where you sort of get into this stickiness between Polish-Jewish relations or Israeli-Polish relations. A lot of it has to do with memory, and very little of it has to do with stuff on the ground today. So the relationship with the government has been good. The relationship with the church is good. Again, I say these things as a cynical New Yorker, so don't be like, oh, he's all, Pollyanna. Not at all. But we have a very good situation. Anti-Semitism is very low. There is, I think, fewer places in the world to walk around with a kippah and be openly Jewish today than Krakow. The community is growing. You have Ukrainian Jews that are coming, that are staying. You have people that are discovering their Jewish roots, as I told you about. And you have Israelis that, especially since October 7th, do not feel safe in other places in Europe. Generally, if I look at Europe, Western Europe is rich and unsafe for Jews, and Eastern Europe is poor and safe for Jews. And all of you and all of us, if our parents left somewhere and went somewhere else, which pretty much, I don't think any of you are native to Southern California, it's because of two things. Jews generally go wherever they go for two reasons. One, place that it's safe to be Jewish, reasonably low, let's say, anti-Semitism. Two, parnasa, a place you can make a living for your family, right? And if you look at those two categories in Europe, a place with a decent economy and low anti-Semitism, there is not that much in Europe that looks like that. Poland is the real bright spot. So we're seeing growth of Jewish life in Poland as October 7th has pushed the Holocaust a little into the background. What do I mean by that? To say, how can I live in Poland, what happened in Poland 80 years ago? But if I'm an Israeli living in Europe, and I can live anywhere, I work in IT, I'm a programmer, I can live anywhere, and I have the choice of living in a place that would have been awful for my grandparents 80 years ago, or a place where my daughter isn't safe in school, it's an easy choice. It's an easy choice. And unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case, but as the world becomes a darkening place in many places for Jews, Poland becomes a bright spot, and the argument against Poland is the history, right? It's not today. I'm not saying, today there's anti-Semitism stuff. No, it's the history. I get it. What happened there is so awful that it's hard to imagine it as a place of life. But it behooves us to do so because we can't live in the past. And if you think about it, we're still here because we as a people have made pragmatic, practical decisions. There's a pogrom, it's not safe, psh, let's go, right? Let's go. That's why we're around. And that's the same thing that's happening in the other direction. So we need to get it a little bit, not forget about the Holocaust, but not see everything in Poland exclusively through the prism of the Holocaust. Rabbi.
Can you talk a little bit more about the state of the refugee situation in Poland? What is the legal status of these hundreds of thousands of people? What's the long-term vision? A little bit more. It feels like it's been pushed out of our American news.
Yeah, it has been. So the number right now, Poland is a country of about 38 million. 7 million refugees have passed through Poland. 2 million are there now. 2 million out of 38 million. The legal status is very good for them. At this point, they're not really getting much aid, but what they are getting is they can send their kids to school, they can work, and they have access to, and you're all seated so I can say it, free healthcare, as all of us do in Europe and the rest of the world. So it's a reasonable place. What will be interesting, eventually the war will end, and we automatically think, oh, but then so many Ukrainians will go back. Well, depends how the war ends, what the borders look like when the war ends, and also men can come in the other direction once the war ends, right? Now men can't leave the country, so a lot of Ukrainians that have settled around the world will be their families will be reunited where they are now. So you're going to see it in both directions. So it's complicated. Ukrainians are in a place like Krakow, a city of Krakow. 800,000 is our population, and we have about 80,000 to 100,000 Ukrainians. So something like 10% of the city is Ukrainians. But a lot of the support has dried up. Our food pantry is the only thing of its kind in Krakow that's serving these refugees, and it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge to be able to continue to support these refugees, but it's an honor to be able to do so.
And I'm wondering,
Sure.
is there
Rabbi gets the follow-up. He's the rabbi.
I apologize.
Yeah.
Is there any internal conversation amongst your leadership about how much focus is on the Jewish community versus how much focus is on the refugee community, and how does that get navigated?
Yeah, there is. So for us, essentially, what my understanding with my board is that as long as we're able to fund all the stuff that we need to fund Jewishly, then as much as I want to do for Ukraine, I can do. So we raise money separately. Our whole budget is raised here for our day-to-day activities, for our preschool, for all the Holocaust survivors. That's all raised, and as long as we can take care of that, then if people want to separately give for Ukraine, then we'll do that. But we don't take money from. It's not as if the preschool can't give a preschool scholarship because I'm supporting Ukraine. It's two separate buckets. So we're okay with that. I mean, just to understand the scale, we are, not to talk so much about money on Shabbos, but we are about a $4 million a year organization, our budget, and we've raised and spent $15 million on Ukraine beyond our regular budget. So a lot. Yeah.
I want to say between 8 and 10 years ago, there was a mockumentary that was released by, I think, by the Polish government that won many awards. It was distributed internationally. It was even shown in Orange County, inviting Jews back to Poland. Was that in any way influential with the ingathering that you're seeing?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, but I'm happy it was out there.
It was a mockumentary.
Mockumentary. There was I know what now I know what you're talking about. Mockumentary, like Spinal Tap. Yeah, it was an art project that was done. The Jews.
Sponsored by
No, not sponsored by the. Don't give the Polish government that much credit for being so avant-garde with things like that. But no, it's not. It was not something that had moved the needle very much. What moves the needle for people are economic things. Poland is doing very well economically. I mean, it's not a rich country. It's not America, but it's going in the right direction. If you look at GDP since 1989, number one growth in GDP in the world since 1989. Where is it? Easy question, come on. No. China. Number one is China. Number two, Poland. So doing all right. Yes.
What does average daily life look like for a Jew living in Poland? Are there synagogues? Are most people non-observant? Are most people assimilated?
Yeah, it depends where in Poland. So in Krakow, what Jewish looks like is, I think Jewish life is very rich because of all the non-Jewish interest. You have a lot of Jewish topics and Jewish culture, and someone's writing a book, and there's a klezmer concert. A lot of it is not only by the Jews and for the Jews; it's about the Jews. So there's very rich life. But no, we have at this point, we have through our JCC, Krakow and Warsaw are the leading communities, and you certainly have much less going on in other communities. But in our community, you know, we don't have a Jewish school past a preschool. But besides that, we have a preschool, we have BBYO, we have a young families program. I mentioned Hillel. We're doing something, a program between the preschool and BBYO. We're always adding groups. We added a group. We have a very active group now of 30 to 45. So after they age out of the Hillel thing. So there are synagogues. Yeah, you have, I mean, it gets complicated because a lot of the sort of official Jewish life in Europe is Orthodox, but most of the people aren't. So there's a bit of a disconnect between, it's like a top-down sort of situation. Like the Sephardic world, there's a way that you can be Jewish. You can do it or not do it, but you don't mess with it. So that's a little bit what Jewish life is in Europe. We do have a small Reform community in Krakow, but they don't have a synagogue, and there's no conservative, unfortunate, as somebody who grew up going to the Forest Hills Jewish Center and feels spiritually at home in the conservative movement. We don't have that in Krakow yet. But people are, you know, people only have the options that they have, right? So people are like, oh, how does it break down? You find out that you have some Jewish roots, you're pre-denominational, right? You don't belong to any of that. And people, you know, so that's what we're trying to do is say there's a good environment for being Jewish. There are people that finding out they're Jewish. You have a growing Jewish community with low anti-Semitism, and we're trying to build the infrastructure that a community needs, just like your community needs infrastructure. So it's not massively, the idea isn't so complicated, the implementation is what gets complicated. Sure, in the back.
Other one. Exposure, or have you had any say in the educational curriculum in the public school system in Krakow versus Poland? How are they with anti-Semitism?
Not bad. I mean, people always ask the question of, do they teach the Holocaust? And the answer is yes, they do a pretty good job of teaching the Holocaust. The problem is they don't teach the Jewish stuff much beyond the Holocaust. So we have 1,000 years of Jewish life in Poland, not 6 years of Jewish death in Poland. The 6 years of Jewish death, 39 to 45, are part of the 1,000 years, but not the entire 1,000 years. So we actually we have a program that we have our people voluntarily go to public schools and augment the education by teaching them about Jewish life before the war and now after the war. But Poland is reasonable with that. Other back.
Is there a mechanism right now in Poland for Jews that are not in Poland that have Polish roots or background to connect the genealogy and figure out the connection?
Yeah, we have a genealogist on staff, so you can be, if you're interested, you can be in touch with me about that. There's also something in Warsaw called the Jewish Historical Institute, which is kind of the guardian of Jewish memory in Poland, and they have also genealogy that it might take a little bit longer because it's like a big bureaucracy. But if anyone can get in touch with me, and I pass it on to our genealogist. Yeah.
The remaining anti-Semitism that is present today, where is it coming from? And have you experienced anti-Semitism, other people in your community, and in what form?
I haven't. Not to say there's no anti-Semitism in Poland. Of course, there's anti-Semitism everywhere, but we don't really feel it as a threat. If you would have asked me before October 7th, what are the top 10 issues, challenges, problems in your community, anti-Semitism wouldn't have made my top 10. We had, for the first 9 years we were open, we had no security at all. Gate wide open, front door wide open. It says on our gate, actually, still stop by and say hi, which is not what it generally says on most Jewish buildings, I think, around the world. And we had no issues. Only when we opened the preschool did I think, oh, you know what? We live in a Europe without borders. We have Jewish kids in the building, so we have a security guard. That was very unobtrusive. Since October 7th, we've had our gate closed. Again, not because of Poland, because of a Europe without borders. And to go from Paris, where there are a lot of people who don't like us, to Poland is like going from Nevada to California. It's, you just get in a car and go. So yeah, what types of anti-Semitism? I think Polish anti-Semitism is more about, you know, we often look at anti-Semitism like it's binary. This person is or anti-Semitic. Oh, that company, that restaurant, or that leader, this is or isn't, right? Binary. Anti-Semitism is a whole category, right? Within that category is genocide, right? I hate Jews and I'm going to kill them, or I think Jews might be a little bit pushy. Or, both of those things would be anti-Semitic, but they're not exactly the same. I think Polish anti-Semitism is a lot about jealousy. In the Polish idea of Jews, the Jews were doing better. And this has to do with, without getting too deep into it, Poland, the middle class in Poland was really the Jews, and very often the upper class, the people who did business for the upper class with the lower class were the Jews, and there was kind of resentment toward the Jews that were doing better. Of course, we all know that there was tremendous amount of Jewish poverty in Poland. It's not like, oh, those rich Polish Jews, far from it, but everything is relative. As opposed to a place like Germany, where I think the anti-Semitism is looking down at the Jews. So I think Poland is jealousy, and I think Germany is, oh, those pesky Jews kept us, Germany, from our rightful place ruling the world, right? So I think it's a different type of anti-Semitism and a different feeling, but maybe the same effect. Yeah.
Do you think you have any influence on your friend King Charles about anti-Semitism in England?
No. I think that he's, I'm saying I know him very well, but I've, spent a decent amount of time with him. And for him to do what he did in Krakow, there was no political angle. There was nothing like, oh, I want to be good with the Jews, so I'll build a community center in Krakow. It was a very controversial project that he really believed in and he really cared about. Subsequently, he became the patron of the organization that built us, and is very involved with Jewish cause. I think he's a friend to the Jewish people. I think he's really a decent human being. I think that fighting anti-Semitism in the UK is something that he cares about, and I don't think he's the one primarily sort of tasked with doing that, unfortunately. But I think I know him, and that he's a decent and absolutely a friend to the Jewish people. His grandmother, do you know the story of his grandmother? Any of you? His grandmother is buried in Jerusalem because she is a righteous among the nations. Prince Charles's father's mother is of a Greek royal family and saved Jews during the war. And when he went to Israel for the first time, which I think was the first time any member of the royal family went to Israel, for Shimon Peres's funeral, he went to visit his grandmother who's buried in Jerusalem. So, yes.
You briefly alluded to relationships with the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church for 10 centuries has been the major component of Polish society and a key source of historical anti-Semitism. And, given a Polish pope and all of that, you said things were okay, and I was just wondering if you could go into that in a little more depth.
And the Republicans warned us for decades about Russia. So, the world changes, right? We live in a world where things shift, right? Politically, things shift, and one country becomes this and that. So, the Catholic Church has changed. What do I mean by that? The Catholic Church, I would agree with you that the main source of anti-Semitism throughout history has been the Catholic Church. And now that's, I would think, no longer the case. The church is, after Vatican II, the church has gone through certain changes. The fact in Poland that John Paul II was a great friend to the Jewish people and said that you can't be a good Catholic and be anti-Semitic, I think helped a lot. So we have a warm relationship with the church, not only like tolerant, but I think that it's a good relationship. We have an organization of Christian-Jewish Friendship Society that I'm one of the people involved, very involved, and yeah, it's a good relationship. But I agree that it's changed. Sometimes, you're a kid, things are one way, and then you grow up and things are very much the other way.
So the church isn't concerned about these thousands of Catholics becoming Jewish? Or?
The church has other problems, first of all. And the church, I think if I do my job better and more people find out, I hope to be good enough at my job that the church is like, uh-oh, we're losing all these people. They're all Jewish. Great. I don't think we're there yet. But, hopefully. Yeah.
Has the JCC had any communications or relationship with the Ukrainian government or Zelensky?
Yeah, actually, before the war, it's funny, the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which was in 2020, we, along with World Jewish Congress and different organizations, hosted a dinner in Krakow, and our guest of honor was Zelensky. But it was before the war started, and nobody cared that it was Zelensky. And what was funny is that we were dealing with his security and stuff, and our joke that like we couldn't believe how unprofessional the Ukrainian secret service was around Zelensky. We're like, oh, thank God there's no war or anything. Like we couldn't. We're saying that as a JCC. We're not like security people. So it was ironic that he became this. You didn't see it, but I talking to him. It was like no big deal. I went home. I was like, ooh, Zelensky. But it's pretty cool that. So we do have good relations with the government. I mean, they appreciate that a tiny Jewish community center in Krakow has helped more Ukrainians than any organization of any size in the world. They're very appreciative. And yeah, I don't drink, but if I did, I don't think I would probably ever pay for a beer in Ukraine if I went. Yeah.
Hi, this might be naive, but a couple of years ago we went up the Danube and all the Eastern European capitals, which didn't include Poland. I'm wondering, you've done incredible stuff in Poland, but we happened to be in Novi Sad and there was a synagogue and they did a Jewish kind of program for us. I'm wondering, are you involved with any of the communities that are sort of lost along that river, or are they all independent in their own country?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's independent. We do something, we try to help other communities where we can and, with best practices and mentoring. But, these are countries with different languages and different borders. So, yeah.
Yes. In 1985, I went with my father back to Poland. He was a sole survivor of his whole family to see what was there. There was nothing there in a town called Łomża, north of Warsaw.
Yeah, yeah.
And to me, this anti-Semitism in 1985 was palpable. When we went through our tour of Auschwitz, the word Jew was never even mentioned. And I'm, quote, shocked and amazed that things have turned around so much in 40 years, and I'm ecstatic about it.
Yes, no, it is surprising. And if you went to Auschwitz, if you went to Auschwitz before 1989, exactly as you say, you hardly knew that Jews were involved. It said, oh, and this is where the transport of the Romanians came, and this is where they brought the Hungarians. And you had to really know your history to understand that the reason they were bringing these people from all over Europe is that they were Jews. But why is that? Because the Soviet Union controlled Poland, the Communist Party, and it wasn't in the interest of the anti-Semitic Soviet Union to show the suffering of Jews, right? If you want to persecute people, you don't show their suffering. It makes it more difficult to persecute them. So, yeah, I wish I'd been there then to have the perspective that you have from during communism. But of course, it's especially when you go to places like Auschwitz and you see what it was like before and what it's like. Not that it's perfect now, but it's much better than it was, for sure. Sure.
What's your hope, your vision for your community 5 years from now?
I hope that the community can continue to grow and thrive, and that, what I think that Poland has a role in world Jewry today. And it's not only, oh, poor Poland, we need to feel bad and just, give them money and things like that. That, yes, but I think the comeback story of Poland, if you will, is something that the Jewish world needs. Not least of which because we all come from there. The idea that so many of you come from this place, and the place that so many of you come from is primarily defined for all of you as a place of tragedy and loss, is not healthy. It's good for us to be connected to our roots. And for many of us, most of us, our roots are Poland. So for my community, I want it to continue to grow and thrive and let there be a day school and whatever, a conservative movement in Poland, all of these things that we need. But my other side of my wish is I want American Jews and Jews around the world to learn and be inspired by Poland and see the strength and resilience of our people. Shabbat Shalom.
I just want to thank you on behalf of our community for coming and sharing this really inspiring presentation. If people want to stay in touch with you, if they want to know about opportunities to visit or opportunities to support, what's the best way that we can be supportive to your work?
Thank you for that. I have some material and information here with me, and cards and ways to get involved, and information about our bicycle ride that I didn't mention. We do a great bicycle ride from Auschwitz to the JCC at the end of June. Take care of bikes and everything, ride for the living. And there's a participation with the Mirage JCC, so we always have a little ride going on there, and there's supposed to be a group coming. So if you can come talk to me after, and I'd love you to get involved. Thank you, Rabbi.
Absolutely. I will mention that you are not taking a speaker's fee for this presentation. We are not fundraising on Shabbat, but should people be moved to support this work, you should know that Jonathan came here purely to share the word, to let people know about what's going on, and if people were so moved to help to advance this work, I think it would be you have made a clear case why this is a profound mitzvah. Thank you so much for being with us. We look forward to hopefully opportunities individually to connect, but maybe as an institution to find ways to come and be a part of it. Yashar Koach to you and all the incredible work.